Greetings, traveler. What exactly is a video game? I know this seems like a very obvious question, but very often we don't discuss the fundamentals of making video games. When we start to create a new project, we just say this game is going to be similar to that other game that already exists, and we rush ahead, start creating levels and monsters and abilities and so on. But that process is very prone to just copying what's out there, and understanding the fundamentals of what a video game is, or a game in general, can help us take this creative process in new directions and delight our players in new ways. My name is Xanthos. I've been working in the games industry for over 13 years now, and I can tell you for a fact that throughout my career and throughout my discussions with other game developers, I have never heard anyone discuss this topic. So when we're talking about a game, we start with the image of a typical popular video game in mind, and we say that our next project is going to be like that one, but with these key differences. But when that happens, we are sort of putting ourselves in a mold. We start from a game like that as our starting point, and we take a myriad assumptions about how things should be about our game. So what the main actions of the game are, what the world is, how the monsters behave, the enemies, what the challenges are, and so on. That can lead us down a path where we're just copying what's out there without really validating each choice and justifying the existence of each element in a game. And then you might ask yourself, traveler, why do we need to do all this? Why do we need to validate every single choice and every single thing we put in the game? Can't we just copy something out there, copy something that's already out there, and change the graphics a little bit or change the abilities a little bit and the characters? Of course you can. In fact, that's what 99.9% of the games do out there. And here is where the opportunity lies. By understanding exactly what a video game is and what it's trying to do in society, in human culture, in the market, and so on, we have much more control over the process, and our choices have the ability to delight so many more people. So let's jump into the specifics of this. So the way I define what a game is, or what a video game is it is a model of a real life experience that tries to show off its fun aspects, and it also tries to teach through that process. So what that means is that, let's say you have a video game about golf. It tries to model the fun of playing golf, what the creator believes are the fun points of playing golf, for example, and at the same time teaching what the creator believes is the important points of playing golf. You can think of chess the same way. Instead of having an actual large battle with actual people fighting on the battlefield, which is of course hugely dangerous, hugely costly, and hugely terrible in every way, you can have a board game that doesn't have any of the negatives. It can teach you the basics of strategy. You can think about how to manage your resources, how to manage your time, your game in general. And it shows you the fun of, victory, outmaneuvering your opponents, thinking of new techniques, new strategies to tackle every situation. So it gives you all the fun of possibly being a general or a commander, and at the same time, it has a very important point to teach. So if we're talking about chess, it's trying to teach that you should try to conserve your army's strength as much as possible. You shouldn't sacrifice your units or your resources without a good reason. You try to preserve them as much as possible. And if you manage to complete the objective, and again, the objective is very specifically set, then you can achieve victory. And that, throughout the years and the ages, has proven useful not just for military commanders, but for everybody in everyday life as well, mastering that skill that chess tries to teach. So here we see how that aspect is so important about our games. When we're thinking about a new game, of course, we can just copy something that's out there and simply inherit all of the assumptions that come together with it. But if we start, oh, hold on, there's somebody at the door. Sorry, it was some new goodies from Kingdom Death. Let me know if you're interested in seeing that kind of thing, by the way. Anyway, so if we take the time to analyze what sort of game we want to make, then we can be more conscious about the fun and the learning aspect that we want to include. So, for example, we spoke about the golf example before. So notice how in golf video games, you don't have the part where you drive up or you walk up to the golf course. You don't have the part where you dress up for it and carry your clubs and drive around the golf course. You don't have the part about paying the subscription and paying for the ticket. Basically, you don't have any of the tedious negative parts of playing golf. You only have, typically, most games start from the moment you're about to take the swing to just bring you to the fun aspect as quickly as possible. And you're only focused on the progression of the game. So, how many points you got, how beautiful the views are, how great it feels to get the swing right. I don't know much about golf, so that's as far as my as my explanation can go. But basically, the game only focuses on the fun aspects and tries to obfuscate as much as possible of the tedious, boring, um, not so fun, not interesting parts. And at the same time, most games try to teach something about it as well, right? So in the case of golf, there is something about the stance and the club selection and the timing of the hit or where you aim the ball towards. So we don't think about this part because we're so used to seeing that in many video games. But this is the teaching part of the game. Here, the game is trying to tell you if you do it this way, you're going to have good results. If you don't do it this way, you will fail. And most video games are very, very particular about this. You can see it in so many examples. You can see, for example, in let's say in one war game about being a soldier in some kind of war. If the game wants to emphasize bravery and valor and courage and all these things, typically it will allow things such as like rushing ahead, charging alone against a group of enemy soldiers, um, showing that even though you're facing crazy odds, you are, your courage and your decisiveness is more important, and somehow all the bullets of the enemy will miss you and you'll be fine in this if the game wants to model this experience. But if the game wants to be super realistic, wants to show that world war is a terrible thing and everybody dies left and right, and it's there's very high pressure and nobody wants to face all these crazy situations in war, then typically it will value hiding behind covers more. It will value deceiving the enemy, taking the long way around to get to the enemy, being careful, being calculating. And at the same time, if you try to just jump over the cover and try to rush with no cover towards the enemy, that game will immediately kill the player character. And what that game is trying to teach is that in this situation, according to the designers, being careful and being calculating and being um, and prioritizing safety is the way to solve this situation for that particular situation, for that particular game, of course. So exactly what we want to teach with our games is very much one of the two core centers we should be thinking about when we're designing a game, in my experience. And also, equally, the fun part is the same. So if what we talked about with golf, for example, is what we consider to be the fun part, so getting the swing right, aiming right, choosing the right club and so on, seeing the vistas and all that. If the designer believes that those are really, really fun aspects of the game, then that is probably a good idea to have something to include in the game. And of course, you can see at the same time how two different designers or two different teams would approach the same topic in a completely different way. something that I experienced early on and uh, gave me a very good understanding about this topic is racing games, right? Some racing games are all about the arcadey feeling, so just looking at cool cars and just having fun without worrying about car damage and fuel and settings and so on. So clearly, the designers think that, you know, one aspect of cars is the speed and the beauty of the cars and driving fast and not worrying too much about all the small details, while other designers might think, no, 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 having a realistic experience where you care about the tires and the fuel levels and the suspension ride height and all of that stuff is super fun, because if you get all of those right, then you can have a good result in the race. And that feeling, that pleasurable feeling of winning in that environment, um, is a special kind of fun that they want to show through that game. Similarly, I've had the same experience, well, in many games, but also in snowboarding kind of games, where some games are about the performance when you're doing snowboarding. So how quickly it takes you to do a run, how many tricks you can do. Um, yeah, all sorts of technical stuff like that. While I remember a game called Chill from PlayStation 1 era, where basically, yes, you did have all these things. There was times and tricks and so on, but the game really wasn't about that. The game was about four characters, and you could choose any one of them. And it was more about the fashion of snowboarding, the colorful clothes, and just that camaraderie feeling between those four. I suppose they were friends, so the four main characters of the game. So it's more about the interaction of the characters, and I felt more the pleasure of having a snowboarding trip with your friends and enjoying the human aspect of it and the friendship aspect of it way more than the technical aspect of how quick you were, how many points you scored, and all that. At least that was my experience. So, keeping that in mind, I found to give us a lot of clarity when it comes to game design and when designing something new, and it it helps us avoid all the typical grandfathered errors we get from other games, right? If we simply copy a game that's out there and just change the theme or just change the ability names or the graphics only, that's not necessarily a bad thing, but it comes together with this downside where we often inherit choices that other people made that might not be in our best interest. And because we're not even aware of that aspect, it hurts us in a very insidious and in a way that comes from a blind spot for us. So I found that by being very conscious about the learning and teaching aspect and the fun aspect of the games and why we make the choices we do, um, can make the design process much more clear and much more enjoyable, and hopefully with better results. Anyway, these are my thoughts on this topic. If you're someone who has thought about this topic and likes to stop and break down everything to its base components and question everything and be very investigative in your design process, please let me know if you have a similar experience or what your method is. I would love to read and know about it. Anyway, that's it for today. I hope this helps at least one other person out there. And as always, have fun.